Policy overview and context. During the period under analysis, a government implemented significant adjustments in its approach toward a neighboring country, focusing on trade, economic policy, and bilateral agreements. Traditionally, relations between the two countries were stable, built on institutional cooperation, shared economic interests, and security partnerships. The new policy approach emphasized renegotiation of trade agreements with attention to domestic economic priorities, including industry protection and market balance. These measures introduced changes in tariffs, trade incentives, and regulatory frameworks, prompting both nations to reassess established procedures. Policymakers were tasked with balancing short-term economic objectives with the need to maintain long-term trust and predictability. The adjustments had implications for integrated supply chains, industrial planning, and cross-border collaboration, highlighting the interconnectedness of modern economies. This segment demonstrates how policy shifts, even within allied nations, require careful management to avoid unintended consequences and ensure the sustainability of cooperative frameworks. Historical context of bilateral relations. The neighboring countries in question have historically maintained a stable and cooperative relationship across multiple domains, including trade, security, energy, and infrastructure. Long-standing agreements and institutional mechanisms have facilitated smooth coordination, even when occasional disagreements arose. Over time, both nations developed systems to manage cross-border issues efficiently, ranging from regulatory alignment to joint security initiatives. The period under analysis marked a departure from previous practices, introducing new policy measures that required recalibration of established routines. This shift highlighted the importance of understanding historical patterns of cooperation when implementing changes in governance or economic policy. Policymakers were challenged to reconcile evolving domestic priorities with the expectations of their counterparts. The situation illustrates that even among closely aligned nations, changes in strategy or emphasis can necessitate adjustments in diplomatic, economic, and institutional processes to ensure continuity, stability, and the preservation of mutual trust in long-term relationships. Trade policy adjustments. During this period, trade policy became a central element of bilateral interactions. Measures such as revised tariffs, regulatory adjustments, and trade review mechanisms were implemented to address perceived imbalances and domestic economic priorities. Both governments had to consider the effects on key industries, including manufacturing, agriculture, and resource-based sectors. Integrated supply chains spanning the border were particularly sensitive to policy changes, highlighting the interconnected nature of the regional economy. The adjustments created short-term uncertainties, prompting governments to implement monitoring systems and consult with industry stakeholders to mitigate potential disruptions. This period demonstrated that while trade measures can influence negotiation outcomes, they must be balanced against the operational realities of interdependent economies. Economic modeling and impact assessment became essential tools for policymakers seeking to understand both immediate and downstream consequences. The episode underscores the importance of careful planning, communication, and coordination in managing policy adjustments in highly integrated bilateral economic relationships. Public perception and stakeholder response. During this period, public perception played an important role in shaping policy implementation and response. In the neighboring country, there was broad interest in maintaining economic stability, protecting domestic industries, and ensuring continuity in cross-border trade. Public sentiment influenced policymakers' willingness to adopt measured responses and reinforced the importance of transparent communication. Similarly, domestic stakeholders in the implementing country, including industry representatives, regional authorities, and economic analysts, monitored developments closely. Their concerns regarding potential disruptions to production, supply chains, and consumer markets contributed to policy adjustments and consultation processes. This interaction between public opinion, stakeholder interests, and governmental decision-making demonstrates how policy changes in one area can influence perceptions and responses in both countries. It highlights the necessity for governments to balance domestic priorities with international coordination, ensuring that short-term adjustments do not inadvertently compromise long-term bilateral relationships or operational stability. Economic impacts and sectoral considerations. Policy adjustments during this period had measurable economic effects on multiple sectors. Industries closely linked to cross-border trade, such as manufacturing, agriculture, and resource processing, experienced shifts in production planning, supply chain logistics, and pricing strategies. Both governments employed economic modeling and risk assessment to understand potential consequences, including short-term fluctuations and longer-term strategic implications. Mitigation measures, such as stakeholder consultation, temporary adjustments, and monitoring frameworks, were implemented to reduce disruption. The episode highlighted the interdependence of the two economies, demonstrating that policy changes in one country can have cascading effects on integrated industries and markets. It also illustrated the importance of analyzing not only direct economic outcomes, but also secondary impacts on employment, consumer costs, and investment. Policymakers needed to balance domestic economic objectives with the broader goal of maintaining predictable and cooperative bilateral relations. Segment 6. Bilateral Agreement Renegotiation. A significant element of the period involved the renegotiation of existing bilateral agreements to better align with evolving policy priorities. Both governments undertook extensive consultations with domestic stakeholders, including industry groups, regulatory agencies, and economic experts, to ensure that proposed changes would address national concerns while preserving cross-border functionality. Negotiations required careful attention to legal frameworks, procedural compliance, and the integration of long-term objectives, including economic growth, trade stability, and regional coordination. While adjustments were ultimately formalized through updated agreements, the process illustrated the complexities inherent in renegotiating long-standing frameworks. It underscored the importance of structured negotiation procedures, transparent communication, and contingency planning. The episode also highlighted the balance required between addressing immediate policy goals and maintaining trust and cooperation, reinforcing the principle that even minor adjustments in agreements must be managed thoughtfully to avoid unintended economic or institutional consequences. Diplomatic norms and institutional functioning. The period under analysis highlighted the importance of diplomatic norms and institutional mechanisms in managing bilateral relationships. Established protocols, including formal consultation, communication channels, and regulatory coordination, play a central role in maintaining predictability and trust. Policy adjustments introduced new dynamics that required institutions to adapt to ensure continuity of cooperation. Both countries' diplomatic and administrative bodies engaged in structured dialogue to interpret policy changes, assess implications, and coordinate responses. The episode demonstrated that institutional resilience is essential for sustaining functional bilateral relations, particularly when shifts in strategy occur. Adherence to procedural norms mitigated potential misunderstandings and facilitated ongoing collaboration across sectors. This case emphasizes that even in well-established partnerships, changes in approach necessitate deliberate institutional management to maintain stability, ensuring that operational and policy goals are achieved without compromising long-term trust or cooperation frameworks. Security and defense considerations. Security and defense cooperation remained a critical component of the bilateral relationship during this period. Long-standing partnerships in regional defense and joint operations provided a foundation for stability and coordination. Policy adjustments in other domains, such as trade or regulatory frameworks, indirectly influenced planning and operational considerations by altering the broader context of trust and predictability. Both nations maintained formal channels for security coordination, ensuring that operational readiness and joint initiatives continued without disruption. Contingency planning and scenario analysis were employed to assess potential impacts of non-security policy changes on defense cooperation. This episode illustrates that security partnerships depend not only on agreements and protocols, but also on the stability of broader political and economic relations. Even when unrelated to defense, shifts in policy emphasis can create indirect pressures on operational planning, highlighting the interconnectedness of bilateral governance. Segment 9. Energy and environmental coordination. Energy and environmental policy coordination formed an important aspect of bilateral engagement during this period. Cross-border energy infrastructure, including pipelines, electricity grids, and resource management agreements, required careful monitoring in response to policy adjustments. Similarly, environmental initiatives, such as emission standards, resource conservation programs, and regulatory compliance, necessitated ongoing collaboration to ensure continuity and mutual benefit. Both governments established interdepartmental working groups to assess potential impacts, share technical expertise, and implement coordinated mitigation measures where needed. These activities underscored the complexity of managing sectoral interdependencies in an interconnected context. The period also highlighted the importance of transparent communication, joint planning, and regulatory alignment to prevent unintended disruptions in energy supply and environmental programs. Overall, it demonstrated that even non-trade policy shifts can influence sectoral collaboration, emphasizing the need for integrated governance approaches across multiple domains of bilateral cooperation. Segment 10: Economic Resilience and Risk Mitigation. The period illustrated the role of economic resilience in mitigating the effects of policy adjustments. Both countries relied on diverse industrial bases, contingency measures, and established trade networks to absorb fluctuations arising from new tariffs, regulations, or procedural changes. Government agencies implemented monitoring mechanisms, stakeholder consultations, and scenario planning to identify risks and develop responsive strategies. Businesses adjusted supply chains, production schedules, and market approaches to maintain operational continuity. These coordinated efforts minimized short-term disruptions while preserving long-term economic stability. The episode emphasizes the importance of proactive planning, adaptability, and institutional support in maintaining resilient economic systems. It also demonstrates that resilience depends on both domestic preparedness and cross-border cooperation, reinforcing the principle that integrated economies require strategic management to balance national policy priorities with the stability of shared economic frameworks. Multilateral implications. Policy adjustments in a bilateral context often have implications beyond the two countries directly involved. Other regional and global partners observe changes closely, as they may influence international trade patterns, economic stability, and diplomatic alignment. During this period, shifts in strategy prompted analysts and policymakers in other nations to assess potential impacts on their own agreements and supply chains. Multilateral institutions also monitored developments to evaluate compliance with international standards and to anticipate possible ripple effects. This illustrates how national policy decisions, even when focused on a neighboring country, can have wider implications for regional cooperation, economic integration, and strategic partnerships. Governments must therefore consider both domestic objectives and international perceptions when implementing changes, ensuring that actions maintain credibility, predictability, and alignment with broader cooperative frameworks. The episode highlights the importance of holistic analysis in evaluating the full scope of policy decisions. Segment 12: Short-term versus long-term considerations. Policy adjustments often involve a balance between immediate objectives and long-term strategic considerations. Short-term measures may address pressing domestic priorities, such as trade imbalances or regulatory reforms, but they can introduce uncertainties for ongoing cooperation. During this period, both countries faced the challenge of managing immediate impacts while safeguarding long-term institutional relationships, economic stability, and cross-border integration. Planning involved assessing direct and indirect effects on industry, supply chains, and regulatory coordination. Contingency frameworks were developed to ensure continuity despite temporary disruptions. This dual focus highlights the complexity of policy implementation in an interconnected bilateral context. Policymakers had to weigh potential benefits against risks, ensuring that decisions did not compromise the sustainability of agreements or cooperative mechanisms. The episode demonstrates that balancing short-term actions with long-term objectives is essential for maintaining functional and resilient bilateral relationships. Segment 13: Institutional Coordination and Governance. During the period, effective institutional coordination proved essential for managing evolving policy measures. Multiple government departments and agencies were involved in interpreting, implementing, and monitoring adjustments, ensuring alignment across economic, regulatory, and security domains. Interagency communication channels facilitated information sharing and risk assessment, enabling timely responses to emerging challenges. Regular meetings, technical working groups, and joint planning sessions allowed both countries to maintain operational continuity and anticipate potential disruptions. This approach illustrates the critical role of institutional structures in sustaining stable relations when policy priorities shift. By leveraging established governance mechanisms, governments were able to manage uncertainty while preserving trust and predictability. The episode underscores that strong institutional frameworks are vital for translating strategic objectives into coordinated action and for maintaining the integrity of long-term cooperative agreements across multiple sectors. Regional economic integration. The period highlighted the degree of economic integration between the two nations. Cross-border trade, supply chains, and industry networks required coordination to maintain efficiency and continuity. Policy adjustments had implications for production schedules, logistics, and market access. Both governments monitored these effects closely to ensure that integration remained functional, despite temporary adjustments. The episode illustrates that highly integrated economies require careful planning when implementing policy changes. Coordination mechanisms, such as joint working groups and regular reporting, helped mitigate disruptions and maintain predictability. It also highlighted that economic interdependence creates mutual incentives for cooperation, emphasizing the need to consider both domestic priorities and shared regional stability in decision-making. Maintaining operational continuity in integrated systems requires ongoing communication, technical collaboration, and strategic foresight. Segment 17: Communication and Transparency. Effective communication and transparency were essential components of managing policy adjustments. Clear explanation of objectives, processes, and potential impacts helped reduce uncertainty for domestic stakeholders, industry representatives, and the public. Both countries emphasized timely dissemination of information through official channels, technical briefings, and interagency coordination. Transparency also reinforced trust, signaling that decisions were evidence-based and procedurally sound. The period demonstrated that even complex policy changes can be implemented effectively when communication strategies are integrated into planning. It underscores the role of transparency not only in domestic governance, but also in maintaining confidence in cross-border cooperation. Well-structured communication channels allowed both governments to manage expectations, respond to concerns, and maintain operational continuity while adjusting to evolving policy priorities. Segment 18: Contingency Measures and Operational Continuity. To address potential disruptions, both governments implemented contingency measures across key sectors. This included adjusting supply chain logistics, monitoring trade flows, and coordinating regulatory compliance. Contingency frameworks ensured that economic, industrial, and security operations remained stable despite policy changes. The episode demonstrates that maintaining operational continuity requires both anticipatory planning and adaptive responses. Government agencies, industry representatives, and cross-border institutions collaborated to identify vulnerabilities, implement mitigation strategies, and maintain service and production standards. By embedding contingency measures into policy design, both nations ensured resilience in highly interconnected systems. The experience highlights the importance of proactive coordination and flexibility in governance, particularly in contexts where changes in policy can have wide-ranging operational effects. Conclusion and lessons learned. The period under analysis demonstrates that policy adjustments in a bilateral context require careful balancing of economic, institutional, and operational considerations. Both countries face challenges in maintaining continuity across trade, security, and regulatory frameworks while addressing evolving domestic priorities. The episode highlights the importance of structured negotiation, stakeholder engagement, institutional coordination, and risk assessment in implementing effective policy measures. Communication and transparency emerged as essential tools for managing uncertainty and sustaining trust, while contingency planning ensured operational resilience in integrated systems. Furthermore, the experience illustrates that even temporary adjustments can have long-term implications for bilateral relations, emphasizing the need to consider both immediate objectives and strategic continuity. Overall, the lessons learned underscore the value of proactive planning, multi-level coordination, and evidence-based decision-making. By prioritizing these principles, governments can navigate complex policy environments effectively while preserving stability, predictability, and the sustainability of cooperative relationships over time.